Our useless gremlin named Teo was at a motel with his boss while she was taking a shower. As he sat on the couch waiting for his inevitable doom, he kept thinking to himself that she was nothing but a rude and that he would never be swayed by her. A while later, she came out after finishing her shower, catching him completely off guard. She calmly sat down on a chair and asked him to dry her hair. Without saying much, he began drying it while silently reflecting on the kind of person she was. In his mind, she was the head of his company, yet she was only there because she was extremely picky and had a terrible personality. However, those were not the only reasons he considered her a bad woman. She possessed beauty, wealth, charm, and everything anyone could wish for. Yet despite knowing everything that was happening around her, she had never taken any action to change it. That was the reason he could not bring himself to think of her as a good person. 3 months earlier, Teo had been struggling to find a job. For 3 long months, he had been wondering when he would finally be able to live a normal life. One day, while walking down the street, he happened to notice a beautiful young woman. As he admired her from a distance, he found himself thinking that if he could only get a stable job and earn enough money, perhaps one day he could meet someone like her. While he continued looking at her, she suddenly lost her balance and fell to the ground. For a brief moment, he thought that perhaps fate had answered his wish much sooner than he had expected. He hesitated, wondering whether he should reach out and help her, but before he could react, she had already fallen. The people surrounding them immediately began laughing and making fun of her, leaving the young woman deeply embarrassed. Unable to bear everyone's mocking stares, she instinctively moved closer to Teo in an attempt to hide from the humiliation. Seeing her discomfort, he immediately took off his coat and offered it to her, but she politely insisted that she was fine. Annoyed by the crowd's behavior, Teo told everyone to mind their own business, thinking to himself that they were incredibly irritating people. The young woman remained standing there, clearly struggling to walk. She admitted that her ankle was hurting, and Teo asked if the pain was severe while secretly admiring how beautiful she was. As he looked more closely, he realized that her ankle had become swollen. The young woman's name was Jiran. Teo then offered to carry her on his back, secretly hoping it would give him a chance to become closer to her. Jiran politely declined at first, saying that she would simply try to walk on her own, but Teo continued insisting. Deep down, he thought that carrying her would at least allow him to be close to her, and even that small opportunity felt like a personal achievement to him. Eventually, Jiran agreed, believing that he seemed strong enough to carry her safely. As he carried her, Teo asked where she was headed. Jiran requested that he take her to the building nearby, and without any hesitation, he decided to escort her there. Meanwhile, elsewhere, 2 influential men were meeting inside a company building. One of them was Mr. Ko Cho, while the other was discussing business with him in the presence of a woman named Juhi. Ko remarked that everything had been running smoothly ever since they had switched to the new program. The other man replied that it was good to hear before handing Ko an envelope filled with money. Shortly afterward, Ko instructed Juhi to go to the bathroom on the 3rd floor. She nodded in agreement, but before leaving, she asked him to switch off the device because it had been making her feel uncomfortable. Ko assured her that they would talk once she returned, allowing her to leave the room while he continued with his business. Ko asked the other man whether the deposit had already been made. The man replied that the payment had been completed and that the envelope contained the reward for this deal before thanking Ko for his cooperation. Ko accepted the heavy envelope of cash and remarked that he had never expected such a quick response. Feeling the weight of the envelope in his hands, he commented that it was much heavier than he had anticipated. He then stated that they should continue doing business together from then on, and asked whether the man had already found the next candidate. The other man replied that Ko could earn millions every month as long as he continued bringing in high-quality candidates. Ko responded that he had a very sensitive stomach and advised the man to take his time because he did not want any unnecessary trouble. He then sternly warned him that under no circumstances could his wife or his father-in-law ever learn about their dealings. The other man agreed without hesitation. Afterward, Ko silently reflected that once he got his hands on missile distribution, no one would be able to ignore him anymore. Meanwhile, Teo continued carrying Jiran on his back, feeling genuinely happy that he had been able to help her. As they walked, he noticed that she still seemed uncomfortable and suggested that they should visit a doctor to have her ankle examined. Moments later, Jiran gently got off his back and told him that they had arrived at her office building. Teo immediately offered to help her walk the rest of the way. While supporting her, he reflected that kindness was truly powerful. At the same time, he reminded himself that there was only a thin line between being kind and being overly nosy. He believed that as long as he had given her the impression that he was a kind person, that alone was enough. Deep inside, however, he felt like a loser because he still had no job. He thought that if he had already secured stable employment and possessed more confidence, he might have gathered the courage to pursue her more openly. The thought filled him with disappointment. Soon the two of them arrived outside the building, where an elevator was waiting. As Jiran was about to step inside, she explained that her company was rather unique and did not allow outside visitors to enter. Teo nodded in understanding and told her that it was perfectly fine. He asked her to take good care of herself and said that he should leave. However, Juran thanked him sincerely for all of his help and unexpectedly invited him upstairs for a cup of coffee. Surprised by the invitation, Teo happily accepted and accompanied her into the office. As they entered, Juran explained that their CEO had a very unique taste. Looking around, Teo agreed, noticing that the entire office was decorated in shades of pink. Juran explained that the color pink was believed to reduce aggression and create a calm atmosphere. Teo admitted that it actually did not look bad. Juran then added that the company's motto was to help everyone calm themselves and remain happy while working in the office. Teo acknowledged her explanation with interest. A short while later, Teo noticed Juran beginning to change into a different set of clothes. Seeing his surprised expression, she casually explained that she was simply getting ready for work. Once she had completely changed into a different outfit, she smiled and remarked that he was probably surprised to see her like that, adding that, although it might seem unusual at first, he would eventually get used to it. Teo was left speechless. He had assumed it was nothing more than an ordinary distribution company, yet the company occupied the entire top 3 floors of the building, making it far more impressive than he had imagined. Juran then told him that he could look forward to trying the company's coffee. As Teo looked around the office, he noticed that many of the employees were dressed in rather unusual outfits. Their appearance completely caught him off guard, and he awkwardly wondered where he was even supposed to look. Juran noticed his reaction and casually mentioned that her ankle was already feeling much better. Just then, one of the employees greeted Juran respectfully, addressing her as the vice president. Hearing her title left Teo utterly stunned. Another employee complimented Juran before informing her that the boss was in an extremely bad mood and that she should go to the CEO's office immediately. Teo continued following Juran through the company building, even though he had absolutely no idea where she was taking him. As they walked down the hallway together, Juran casually mentioned that they should have a cup of coffee with their CEO. The moment those words reached his ears, Teo froze in surprise. Before he could even react, Juran continued explaining that they could speak to the CEO and perhaps ask her to find a suitable job for him. She admitted that she could easily tell he had been struggling to find employment simply by looking at his face. Her words left Teo both touched and embarrassed, as he realized she had noticed his difficult circumstances without him ever mentioning them. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Mr. Ko was busy carrying out the very important flexibility training alongside Juhi. Back at the office, Teo was caught completely off guard when Juran revealed that she was actually taking him there for an interview. The realization struck him instantly, and panic quickly took over. Looking down at his casual appearance, he became convinced that there was no way he could attend an interview dressed like that. Feeling both nervous and overwhelmed, he suddenly claimed that he was having a stomachache, hoping it would be enough to avoid the situation altogether. Juran immediately saw through his excuse and gently reassured him that there was no need to be so nervous. She explained that although their boss had a rather peculiar personality, she was not someone who would bite him. Hearing her attempt to comfort him helped Teo calm down slightly. Although he was still anxious, he admitted that he felt a little more relaxed than before. Without giving him another chance to back out, Juran led him directly toward the CEO's office. As soon as they stepped through the door together, Teo was completely stunned by the sight that greeted him. Right in front of him, the CEO was mercilessly tormenting one of the employees. The frightened man had been forced onto the floor while the CEO continued to conduct sus experiments without showing even the slightest bit of sympathy. She repeatedly called him pathetic, making it clear that she had no patience for his mistakes. Meanwhile, the terrified employee continuously lowered his head and apologized over and over again. Despite the tense atmosphere, Juran respectfully addressed the CEO and requested an urgent interview for Teo. However, Teo barely heard what she was saying because his entire attention remained fixed on the shocking scene unfolding before his eyes. He could not believe the way the CEO was treating her employee, and the sight left him speechless. Every harsh word spoken by the CEO only made him feel even more uncomfortable, and he instinctively wanted to step in, although he had no idea what he could possibly do. Noticing the expression on his face, Juran quietly leaned toward him and warned him not to involve himself in the situation. After saying that, she excused herself, explaining that she would go and bring some coffee. Being left alone in such an intimidating room with the frightening CEO was the last thing he wanted. Before Juran could walk out of the office, however, the CEO firmly ordered Teo to sit down and remain where he was until she had finished dealing with the employee. With no other choice, Teo quietly took his seat, still unable to take his eyes off the disturbing scene unfolding in front of him as he nervously waited for the CEO to finish. Juran made her way to the office kitchen. As soon as he noticed her entering the kitchen, he greeted her warmly with a cheerful smile. Looking pleasantly surprised to see her there, he remarked that she had come to the kitchen by herself today and jokingly wondered if someone special had arrived at the office. He curiously asked whether there was a special guest who had prompted her to personally come for it instead of sending someone else. Upon hearing that, the chef immediately shifted the conversation and jokingly suggested that she should consider choosing someone like him for her core trainings instead of always selecting other people. Duran smiled politely before explaining that she simply could not do that because she already had many other responsibilities waiting for her, and several important tasks were still pending. The chef casually dismissed her concern and insisted that it was not such a big deal. Duran, however, clarified that she was not talking about the difficulty of the work itself, but about respecting the value of every employee's efforts and responsibilities. The chef then teasingly asked whether he would ever get an opportunity to have a stretching session with her. Duran looked at him with a playful expression and replied that if he genuinely wanted to train with her, he had better lose some weight as quickly as possible because she preferred slim men. After leaving him with that lighthearted remark, she quietly walked out of the kitchen and continued with her work. Meanwhile, inside the office, the female boss was still putting one of the employees under intense pressure. She repeatedly questioned whether he had truly graduated from the prestigious university that he claimed to have attended. Her constant interrogation made the employee increasingly uncomfortable as she refused to let the matter go and continued challenging his credentials. Watching the entire situation from nearby, Teo silently reflected on her behavior. He felt that she acted as though she were the absolute owner of every employee in the company and believed she had the right to treat everyone however she pleased. Seeing the way she continuously intimidated and pressured the staff irritated him, and he quietly thought that someone like her deserved to be taught a lesson for behaving that way. At that moment, Duran entered the office, carrying a steaming cup of hot tea in her hands. As she approached the room, she casually asked the boss whether the matter still had not been resolved yet. However, before she could properly enter the office, she accidentally lost her balance, causing the entire cup of hot tea to spill directly onto Teo. The scorching tea immediately splashed across Teo, and the intense heat caused him severe discomfort. Duran was horrified by what had happened and immediately began apologizing over and over again. She sincerely explained that she had never intended for such an accident to happen and assured him that she would be much more careful in the future. Because the tea was extremely hot, Teo quickly removed his shirt in an attempt to reduce the burning sensation before the burns became more serious. Instead of expressing concern for the accident, the boss became annoyed by the disturbance. She raised her voice and complained that there was far too much noise during office hours, criticizing everyone for creating such a commotion inside the workplace. While looking toward Teo, the boss's attention unexpectedly shifted to his high-protein chocolate bar after he had changed out his clothes. She silently admired what she saw and appeared noticeably impressed by his macro-friendly bar. Meanwhile, Duran remained completely focused on helping Teo. She carefully attended to his injuries, doing everything she could to soothe the burning pain and reduce the swelling caused by the hot tea, while continuing to feel guilty about the accident. At the same time, the employee who had been continuously questioned by the boss became lost in his own thoughts. He reflected on everything he had gone through just to obtain this job. He remembered all the hardships and sacrifices he had endured along the way and thought about how much his mother depended on him. He recalled the encouraging words she had once spoken to him, telling him that once he entered college, he would naturally meet many girls. Thinking back to his school days, he realized that he had never really thought about meeting girls because he had never considered himself particularly smart or talented. Instead of focusing on relationships, he had spent all of his time studying as hard as he possibly could. At one point, he had even convinced himself that working hard and becoming successful would eventually allow him to meet the kind of people he had always admired. As his thoughts continued, he gradually realized that meeting girls had never depended on academic achievements, professional success, or personal abilities. Even so, he strangely convinced himself that perhaps his boss's harsh treatment was actually teaching him valuable lessons about persistence, endurance, and masculinity. Believing that enduring her constant pressure would somehow prove his strength, he silently resolved to continue standing his ground and tolerate everything she put him through. She quietly acknowledged his determination and concluded that he certainly had some guts. After the accident, Teo went to the bathroom to wash his stained pants. As he carefully cleaned them under the running water, he quietly reflected that, despite everything that had happened, he still genuinely wanted to work at the company. He believed that the opportunity was too valuable to give up, and he was determined not to let a single unfortunate incident ruin his chances. While he was busy washing his pants, another man suddenly walked into the bathroom. Not recognizing Teo, the man immediately questioned who he was and asked why he was inside the company's bathroom. Teo quickly apologized for the misunderstanding and politely turned around to explain himself. However, The moment he looked at the man's face, he froze in surprise because he instantly recognized him as Taesu. At almost the same time, Taesu also recognized Teo. Both of them were equally surprised by the unexpected reunion, and without hesitation, they warmly embraced each other after spending so many years apart. Seeing Taesu again brought back a flood of old memories for Teo. He reflected that 8 years earlier, Taesu had always been the pride of their entire family. Ever since he was a child, Taesu had been exceptionally intelligent, remarkably handsome, and blessed with an impressive personality that everyone admired. His academic achievements had always been outstanding, and he had eventually earned admission to one of the country's most prestigious universities with the highest entrance score. Teo remembered how deeply he had envied him during those days, wishing that he could one day become as successful as his older cousin. Although they were cousins by blood, they had always shared a bond much closer than ordinary relatives. They had grown up together almost like real brothers. Teo also remembered the tragic incident that had changed Taesu's life forever. When Taesu was still very young, both of his parents had lost their lives in a devastating plane crash. Despite enduring such an enormous loss, Taesu had continued moving forward with determination and had never allowed his hardships to stop him from pursuing his dreams. Teo recalled the day Taesu had been preparing to leave home to begin his university life. At that time, Teo was still a young child. Before leaving, Taesu had called him over so they could properly say goodbye to each other. He had explained that once he moved into the university dormitory, he would also have to find a part-time job to support himself and earn enough money to make a living. Because of his studies and work, he expected his life to become extremely busy, which meant they would hardly have any opportunities to see each other again for a long time. Just before leaving the house, Taesu had smiled warmly and told Teo that he had left a surprise waiting for him inside his room. He had asked him to check it after he was gone, and had jokingly told him not to take it personally. He had also promised that once he successfully reached the top and achieved his goals, he would definitely come back to visit him. After making that promise, Taesu had left the house, beginning the journey that would completely change his life. The memories slowly faded as Teo returned to the present, where both cousins were once again standing face to face after 8 long years. Taesu smiled and asked Teo what had brought him to the company. Teo explained that he had come there because he had an interview and hoped to secure a position within the organization. Before either of them could continue their conversation, Juhee suddenly entered the bathroom area. The moment she saw Taesu, her face immediately brightened with excitement. She quickly walked over to him, stood very close to him, and happily asked whether he had been doing well. She admitted that she had missed him very much during the time they had been apart. Overcome by her emotions, she affectionately kissed him. Realizing that they probably had personal matters to discuss, Taesu politely asked Teo to wait for him downstairs until he finished talking with Juhee. Teo agreed without any complaint and quietly left the bathroom. As he walked away, he reflected that Taesu truly remained the pride of their family even after all these years, earning admiration and attention everywhere he went, including inside the office. Curious about what they were discussing, Teo paused outside the bathroom and tried to overhear their conversation. However, Taesu noticed his presence and calmly remarked that they could continue their discussion later. Hearing that, Teo simply smiled to himself before walking away, silently thinking that the situation was rather embarrassing for him. Once Teo had completely left, Taesu turned his full attention toward Juhee and asked about the task he had previously entrusted to her. Juhee replied that he had been right and admitted that she still did not have any concrete proof. Nevertheless, she insisted that there had to be a reason why Director Ko had suddenly decided to change the company's program. She believed that the decision was suspicious and could not simply be dismissed as a coincidence. After carefully listening to everything she had to say, Taesu assured her that he would personally investigate the matter from that point onward. He thanked her for gathering the information and bringing her concerns to him. Juhee looked at him with obvious anxiety and remarked that the situation seemed extremely dangerous. She worried about whether he would be safe if he became involved in the investigation. Unable to suppress her emotions any longer, she began crying and tearfully revealed that Director Ko had returned. Although he understood the risks, Taesu remained firm in his resolve. He explained that he had to uncover the truth for the sake of the company, even if doing so placed him in danger. Juhee then mentioned that it seemed as though Director Ko had specifically been looking for him. Hearing that, Taesu became even more determined and replied that he would have to make his move before it became too late for the company. Teo could not stop thinking about his unexpected reunion with Taesu. The encounter filled him with admiration, and he proudly reflected that Taesu truly was an extraordinary person. Ever since they were children, Taesu had always been someone everyone looked up to, and even now he continued to earn respect wherever he went. Teo became even more determined to secure a position at the company. He silently promised himself that he would work hard enough to earn the boss's recognition, as well as the respect of the other employees. At the same time, he also looked forward to participating in the private PT session that Jiran conducted, believing that they would become another opportunity for him to prove himself. The following morning, Teo arrived at the office and entered the boss's office. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed that the same employee who had been questioned the previous day was once again standing in front of the female boss and enduring another round of relentless criticism. She continued putting the poor employee under intense pressure, making the atmosphere inside the office as tense as ever. Just then, Jiran peeked into the office through the doorway. After noticing Teo standing there, she asked why he had come to the office. Teo politely explained that he had arrived a little late that morning. Jiran calmly informed him that there was a considerable amount of work that needed to be completed before he officially started working the following day. The moment he heard those words, excitement immediately spread across his face because he realized that he had successfully secured the job. Jiran then demonstrated just how much information the company had gathered about him. She calmly stated that she already knew his name and explained that he was 25 years old, had graduated from a 2-year college, and had completed his military service. She continued listing one personal detail after another, mentioning his height and several other facts that he had never expected anyone at the company to know. Every word left Teo increasingly astonished as he listened in complete disbelief. Without stopping, Jiran continued revealing even more information. She stated that he had never had a girlfriend, that his parents had recently forced him to leave their home, that he had no close friends, and that even his messenger ranking in an online game was extremely low. Hearing such deeply personal details left Teo completely speechless. Jiran then bluntly remarked that, based solely on those facts, almost anyone would conclude that he was practically useless to the company. However, she immediately added that there was still one reason why the company had decided to hire him. She explained that he happened to be related to the company's elite employee, Tae-soo Cho. She further stated that Teo had understood the importance of enterprise resource planning at a relatively young age and had studied the field seriously. She also explained that Director Ko was currently rebuilding the company's entire system while introducing major innovations, which was why they intended to make use of Teo's abilities for the time being before eventually discarding him once he was no longer needed. Before Teo could even react to her harsh words, Jiran suddenly lost her balance once again and accidentally fell against him. Realizing what had happened, she immediately stepped back and repeatedly apologized, blaming herself and admitting that she was incredibly clumsy. As Teo continued standing there, his mind suddenly drifted into an imaginary future. He pictured himself already working at the company late at night while everyone else had gone home. In his imagination, he remained alone in the office, carefully staring at the files displayed on his computer monitor. No matter how many times he reviewed the imported goods data, he felt convinced that something was wrong with the records. While he was deeply focused on the files in his imagination, Jiran suddenly appeared beside him. She commented that he was working very late into the night. Teo looked at her in surprise and wondered why she was still in the office at such a late hour. Jiran replied that he clearly did not understand that overworking himself until he collapsed would only cause serious damage to the company. She then added that if they failed to solve the current problem involving the imported goods, the company itself would eventually become history. She jokingly remarked that, in one way or another, they seemed destined to suffer either outcome. Teo responded by telling her that she was interrupting his work and making it difficult for him to concentrate. Jiran simply smiled before admitting that the real reason she had come was because she wanted him to participate in a gym session with her. In the very next moment, Teo suddenly realized that everything he had just experienced had merely been a product of his own imagination. Embarrassed that his thoughts had wandered so far, he apologized to Jiran. Jiran then explained that when he officially started working, the boss would provide him with a full day of training before assigning him any responsibilities. She further informed him that she herself would personally guide him through the company's entire operating system so that he could properly understand every part of the workflow. Teo looked at her with curiosity and asked whether she would really be the one training him. Jiran confidently replied that her training would be extremely demanding and warned him that he should be fully prepared for it. Rather than feeling intimidated, Teo smiled enthusiastically and admitted that he was actually looking forward to it. After finishing the conversation, Jiran told him that she would see him the following day before quietly leaving the office. As soon as she was gone, Teo could no longer hide his excitement. He happily reflected that he had finally been hired by the company. The thought of beginning his new career filled him with enthusiasm, and he promised himself that he would prepare thoroughly before his first official day. He also realized that he should have taken the opportunity to ask Tae-soo for advice about working at the company while he still had the chance. Eventually, Teo left the office building and stepped outside. As soon as he reached the entrance, he noticed that a large crowd of people had gathered in front of the building. Everyone appeared frightened, as they stared upward while pointing toward the roof. Confused by the commotion, Teo slowly lifted his gaze to see what had happened. To his complete shock, he saw Taesu falling from the third floor of the building. The horrifying sight left Teo completely speechless as disbelief and panic overwhelmed him. At that very moment, just before Taesu disappeared from view, Teo caught sight of the shadow of another person standing near the edge of the third floor. From what he witnessed, it appeared that someone had deliberately pushed Taesu from the building. Taesu lost his life that very day, and the tragedy left everyone who knew him in complete shock. A few days later, his funeral was held, where family members and relatives gathered to pay their final respects. Teo was already present at the funeral hall, standing quietly in front of Taesu's portrait. After some time, the female boss arrived at the funeral with her usual confident and intimidating demeanor. Approaching Taesu's memorial, she calmly stated that none of the employees from the company would be attending the funeral because she had personally instructed them not to come. Her statement completely caught Teo off guard. Noticing his reaction, she explained that she was not trying to be heartless or insensitive. She assured him that she would personally cover every expense related to Taesu's funeral. Although Teo appreciated the offer, he quietly replied that money was never the real issue. Before he could finish speaking, the boss suddenly slapped him across the face. Looking directly at him, she sternly warned him not to become so arrogant. Without showing any sympathy, she instructed him to report to work the following Monday. She then explained that the company had lost Mr. Taesu, and because of that loss, they needed Teo more than ever before. Hearing those words, Teo felt both frustrated and confused. He started to protest, insisting that he was not foolish enough to believe that he could simply replace someone like Taesu. However, before he was even given the opportunity to finish what he wanted to say, the boss turned around and walked out of the funeral hall without listening to another word. The moment she stepped outside and was finally away from everyone and unable to suppress her emotions any longer, she quietly broke down and began crying. Meanwhile, another employee, Haeosu, had been waiting for the boss inside the company car throughout the entire funeral. While sitting alone, he reflected that he had wanted to accompany her inside the funeral hall, but he ultimately could not bring himself to enter. He quietly thought about Taesu and remembered what a genuinely kind and respectable person he had always been. After a while, the boss finally came out of the funeral home and approached the car. As soon as Haeosu saw her, he immediately greeted her and remarked that she had returned much sooner than he had expected. He told her that he would prepare everything so they could head back to her house. However, the boss stopped him before he could start the car. She admitted that she felt extremely frustrated and emotionally overwhelmed after everything that had happened. Wanting to release the stress and emotions that had built up inside her, she told Haeosu that she wanted to relieve herself by performing a gym session with him. At that very moment, Teo happened to step outside the funeral home. As he looked toward the parking area, he noticed the boss and Haeosu together. From a distance, he silently watched the two of them as they prepared to leave. The following day, Teo reported to the boss's office for his first day of evaluation. The boss looked at him and asked whether he was ready to begin his trial period. Without showing any hesitation, Teo confidently replied that he was fully prepared and ready to prove himself. A short while later, at Misiel Distribution, Teo was making his way through the office, carefully observing his new workplace as he walked through the busy corridors. While he was looking around, he unexpectedly bumped into Duran. The sudden encounter caught both of them by surprise, but Duran immediately smiled with obvious relief the moment she recognized him. She happily admitted that she had been feeling nervous because she was worried that he might not show up for work that day. Seeing him standing in front of her made her genuinely happy. For a brief moment, Teo found himself quietly staring at her. He could not help noticing how cute she looked, and the thought naturally crossed his mind. However, he immediately forced himself to regain his focus. He silently reminded himself that he had not joined the company simply to admire Duran. He had come there with a much more important purpose. Deep inside, he remained convinced that Taesu was never the kind of person who would take his own life. Determined to uncover the truth, he promised himself that he would investigate the real reason behind Taesu's death. As Duran continued talking to him, she unknowingly stepped closer and closer without realizing what was happening. During the conversation, her shirt accidentally slipped, exposing her planets. The employees nearby immediately noticed the incident and instinctively turned their attention toward her. Several people stood watching in awkward silence. Before anyone could react any further, Teo immediately stepped forward and discreetly covered her, protecting her from everyone's gaze. He then looked at the surrounding employees and firmly told them to stop staring and mind their own business instead of watching someone else's embarrassing moment. Only then did Duran realize what had happened. Feeling embarrassed, she admitted that whenever she was around Teo, she somehow always ended up in awkward situations, yet he always seemed to be the one who rescued her every single time. Just then, another female employee approached Duran and teasingly remarked that she had once again managed to embarrass herself in front of the entire office. Duran immediately looked at her and questioned whether she was genuinely trying to embarrass her even more by bringing attention to the incident. Meanwhile, Teo quietly stood nearby, listening to their conversation without interrupting. As he observed Jiran interacting with her colleague, he reflected on the difference between the image he had formed of her and the reality before him.